I woke up to the sound of sirens. Not the usual peaceful morning I expected on my farm, where the only alarm was my rooster, Gus, crowing at the sun. No, this was different. Flashing blue and red lights bounced off the barn walls, and when I stepped onto my porch, there they were, 2 cop cars parked at my front gate, an officer tapping his notepad impatiently. My gut told me exactly who was behind this. I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose, because if it was who I thought it was, this wasn't about some emergency. This was about the HOA. Again. And this time, they had sent the cops. The officer approached, his boots crunching against my gravel driveway, while his partner hung back, looking slightly amused as if he already knew this was nonsense. The first officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we've received a complaint from the Homeowners Association about a public disturbance on your property. Reports of aggressive animals, potential zoning violations, and a hazardous environment for the community." I exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to laugh. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it. Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had been trying to get rid of me since the day I moved in. I glanced over my shoulder at my so-called aggressive animals. My cows were lazily chewing cud. My horse, Clyde, was dozing in the sun. And Gus, my rooster, was strutting around like he owned the place. Terrifying. "You see any aggressive animals here, officer?" I asked, spreading my arms wide. The second officer, clearly entertained, shook his head. But the first one was doing his job, and I respected that. "Sir, we still need to conduct a routine check," he said, though I could tell he wasn't thrilled about it. I nodded, motioning for them to go ahead. As they walked the property, I spotted Karen herself standing on the other side of my fence, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression that made me want to introduce her to the wrong end of a cow patty. She was talking to another HOA member, pointing at my barn as if she had discovered some great crime scene. I walked over to her, leaning against the fence casually. "Karen, if you wanted to turn my farm, all you had to do was ask." She scoffed. "Jake, your property is a mess. It's a danger to the entire neighborhood. Livestock in a residential zone? That's unacceptable. We have rules, and you keep breaking them." I smirked. "Pretty sure my land is zoned for agriculture. Also, last time I checked, no one was getting hurt by my cows grazing in a field." Karen's lips curled into a thin smile, the kind that told me she had something worse up her sleeve. "That's what you think. The HOA board is voting next week to prohibit livestock. That means your little operation will be shut down permanently." Ah, there it was. The real reason behind all this. She wasn't just annoyed at my farm, she wanted me gone. Karen had been working for months to turn this rural area into a picture-perfect suburban paradise, complete with identical lawns and soulless McMansions. My farm, my animals, my way of life. It didn't fit her vision. The officers finished their walkthrough, finding nothing out of place, but Karen wasn't done yet. "Officer," she said sweetly, "I'd also like to report that Mr. Holloway has been ignoring HOA notices regarding his property's appearance. It brings down the property values of the entire neighborhood. Surely that's an issue." The second officer stifled a laugh. "Ma'am, the police don't handle property values. That's a civil matter. We're here for law enforcement, not landscaping disputes." I turned to Karen, grinning. "Sounds like you'll have to take this one up with the neighborhood gossip circle instead." Her face turned red, but she wasn't backing down. "This isn't over, Jake. You think you can do whatever you want because you have some old farm, but I'll make sure the HOA votes against you. Enjoy it while it lasts." She stormed off, leaving me shaking my head. The officers tipped their hats before heading back to their cars, and I was left standing there, watching as Karen huffed her way back to her cookie-cutter house. I'd had enough. This woman had been coming after me for months, slapping me with fines for things that weren't even real violations, sending her HOA goons to harass me, and now calling the cops. Fine. If she wanted to play games, I'd show her just how much fun we could have. That evening I started planning. Karen and her cronies thought they could intimidate me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. My bulls, Tornado, Lightning, and Meatball, were well trained, but they also had a knack for causing chaos when the situation called for it. And if Karen wanted to trespass on my property again, well, let's just say I had a plan that would make sure she regretted every second of it. Over the next few days, the HOA increased their efforts. More complaint letters, more threats, more ridiculous fines for things like excessive barn dust and unsightly hay bales. They even tried to set up a meeting to discuss my farm's removal. I waited. I knew Karen. She loved feeling powerful. She wouldn't just wait for the vote. She'd come back, bringing the board members with her, probably thinking she could intimidate me into compliance. And when she did, I'd be ready. 3 days later, it happened. Right on schedule. A line of HOA members marched onto my land like they owned the place. No invitation. No warning. Just a self-important army of clipboard-wielding suburbanites, ready to nitpick every inch of my farm. Karen led the pack, her smile dripping with confidence. "Mr. Holloway," she called out, her voice carrying that fake politeness I had come to loathe. "We're here for an official inspection before the upcoming vote. Surely you won't mind us taking a look?" I leaned against the barn, playing along. "Of course, Karen. Take all the time you need." She smirked. She thought she'd won. Then, as they strutted onto my property, I reached behind me and unlatched the bull pen. Tornado, Lightning, and Meatball, 3 half-ton beasts who had been cooped up for a little too long, charged out with all the enthusiasm of kids let loose on a playground. The reaction was immediate. HOA members screamed, diving out of the way as the bulls thundered past. Meatball, the wildest of the 3, locked eyes on Karen, who froze like a deer in headlights. Then he charged. She shrieked, running faster than I'd ever seen, her perfect blonde bob bouncing as she scrambled for cover. Tornado kicked over a table stacked with HOA paperwork, sending papers flying like confetti. The treasurer tripped over his own feet and landed face first in a pile of mud. I watched it all unfold, arms crossed, a satisfied grin on my face. Karen barely made it to the fence, panting and covered in dust, her once pristine pantsuit ruined. She turned to me, rage in her eyes. This is harassment," she sputtered. I shrugged. "I don't know what you mean, Karen. Looks like my bulls just needed some exercise." The other HOA members glared at her, clearly rethinking their allegiance. The neighborhood's so-called leader, running for her life from a farm animal? Not the best look. I dusted off my hands, feeling better than I had in months. Karen wanted a war? She just lost the first battle. Karen didn't take the humiliation well. If anything, she doubled down, which didn't surprise me one bit. After her grand escape from my farm with my bulls hot on her heels, I expected some retaliation. What I didn't expect was just how far she was willing to go. She wasn't content with just annoying me anymore. Now, she wanted me out for good. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of a stapler smacking against my front gate. I stepped out onto my porch with my coffee in hand, only to find a brand new sign posted right in front of my driveway. "Notice of upcoming HOA vote. Prohibition of livestock in the community." I let out a long sigh, taking a slow sip of my coffee while reading the fine print. It was exactly what Karen had threatened me with, an HOA-wide vote to officially ban livestock from the neighborhood. If they won, my farm would technically become illegal, and they'd have every excuse to run me out of town. I turned to Gus, my rooster, who was perched on the railing beside me. "You believe this nonsense?" Gus let out a loud crow in response, which I took as a firm hell no. The whole thing was absurd. This was farmland, and I had made sure when I moved in that my property was zoned for agricultural use. But Karen, being the manipulative little tyrant she was, had found a loophole. The HOA had enough influence over community regulations that they could technically put it to a vote. If enough people sided with her, I'd be in trouble. But I wasn't about to sit back and let that happen. I spent the day talking to my neighbors, trying to gauge which way they were leaning. I already knew some of them weren't exactly my biggest fans, The ones who had moved here expecting a quiet suburban lifestyle didn't appreciate my bulls, my cows, or my early rising rooster. But others liked having a farmer in the area, someone who could help them with repairs, lend a hand when needed, and occasionally offer fresh eggs or milk. The vote could go either way. Of course, Karen wasn't taking any chances. I caught her going door to door, clipboard in hand, spouting off nonsense about how my farm was lowering property values and attracting unwanted pests. I overheard her once, passionately explaining to an elderly couple that my bulls were a menace and that it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt. I waited until she left and knocked on the same door. The old man who answered squinted at me like he expected me to start throwing fists, but I simply smiled. "Mornin', sir. Just wanted to check in and see if you had any concerns about my farm," he huffed, crossing his arms. "That woman says your animals are dangerous." I glanced back toward my property, where Meatball was standing near the fence, lazily chewing on a patch of grass. "Dangerous. Right. I can promise you, sir, my animals aren't a threat to anyone unless you're a carrot." That earned me a slight chuckle, but I could tell he was still wary. Karen had gotten to him first, planting seeds of doubt. That's when I realized her real strategy. She wasn't going to win by logic, she was going to win by fear. That night I sat in my barn with Tornado, Lightning, and Meatball, thinking. If Karen wanted to fight dirty, I could do the same. But I had something she didn't. I had patience. 3 days before the vote, Karen organized an emergency HOA inspection. I knew it was a setup the moment I saw the group of them marching toward my farm again. This time, they came in bigger numbers, Karen, her inner circle, and even a few of the neighbors she had convinced to support her. They walked up my driveway like they owned the place, clipboards ready, determination in their eyes. I leaned against the fence, watching as Karen put on her best authoritative face. "Mr. Holloway, we are here to document the hazardous conditions of your farm before the upcoming vote. We expect your full cooperation." I nodded casually. "Oh, of course. Come on in." I stepped aside and let them wander onto my land. They immediately started nitpicking everything. One woman took a picture of a perfectly normal pile of hay as if it was some crime scene evidence. Another man pointed at my cows and whispered something to Karen, who nodded dramatically. Then, at just the right moment, I gave a subtle whistle. The barn doors creaked open behind them. The first to step out was Meatball, and he looked mighty excited. Then came Tornado, flicking his tail with his usual calm intensity. Finally, Lightning, always the most restless of the three, pawed at the dirt and snorted. The HOA members froze. Karen's eyes widened in realization. I crossed my arms. "Now, I'd be real careful where you step. These boys don't like uninvited guests too much." Panic set in almost instantly. One woman let out a shriek, scrambling backward and nearly tripping over a wheelbarrow. The treasurer, a portly man with a receding hairline, held up his clipboard like a flimsy shield. Karen, of course, tried to keep her composure, but I could see the fear creeping into her expression. Lightning took a step forward, just curious, but Karen took it as a charge. She let out a high-pitched yelp and bolted toward the fence, shoving past her own people in the process. The others followed, tripping over themselves to escape, their official inspection turning into a full-blown stampede. I watched them scramble away, chuckling to myself. By the time they reached the road, Karen was breathless, red-faced, and furious. She turned back to me, shouting from a safe distance. "This is harassment. You're a menace to this community." I tipped my hat. "You came onto my property, Karen. Can't blame a man for letting his bulls roam free on his own land." She stormed off, her followers trailing behind her, but I knew she wasn't giving up. If anything, I had only made her more determined. That night, I heard a rumor from one of my more sympathetic neighbors. Karen wasn't just planning to win the vote, she was planning something else. Something bigger. I stayed up late in my barn, cleaning out stalls, thinking. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. Karen had a personal vendetta against me, and she wasn't going to stop until she either ran me out of town or humiliated me so badly that I wished I had left. Fine. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her one. I had one last trick up my sleeve, and it was going to be a showstopper. The night before the big HOA vote, I could feel the tension in the air. The neighborhood was buzzing with whispers, everyone eager to see how it would play out. Karen had spent the past few days rallying her supporters, spreading every lie she could think of about my farm. I heard through the grapevine that she was even offering favors, discounts on HOA fees, priority lawn maintenance, whatever it took to sway the undecided votes. She was desperate, and desperate people did stupid things. I had my plan set, but I wasn't going to act until the time was right. Instead, I spent the day keeping things normal, tending to my animals, pretending like I didn't have a care in the world. That drove Karen crazy. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me sweating bullets. But I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. By the time evening rolled around, the neighborhood meeting hall was packed. HOA members, longtime residents, newcomers, everyone had shown up for what was being called the most important vote in the community's history. That was Karen's wording, not mine. She had turned my farm into some kind of existential threat, like I was a villain standing in the way of her perfect, white picket fence utopia. I walked in, tipping my hat to the few friendly faces in the crowd. Most of them nodded back, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Karen had done a good job of making them second-guess whether my farm belonged here. I spotted her standing at the front of the room, her clipboard in hand, wearing a triumphant smile. She thought she had already won. The meeting began with the usual nonsense: budget updates, neighborhood concerns, some lady complaining about someone parking too close to her driveway. But then Karen stood up, clearing her throat dramatically, as if she was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we are here tonight to decide the future of our community. We have a choice. Do we move forward, embracing progress and safety? Or do we allow outdated, hazardous, and frankly, unsightly elements to remain?" She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. She launched into a speech about property values, community aesthetics, and the dangers of livestock in a residential area. She claimed my bulls had terrorized residents, that my farm was an unregulated health risk. She even threw in a line about children being in danger, which was ironic considering the only kid I'd ever seen near my property was a neighbor's grandson who loved visiting my chickens. Then she dropped her final bombshell. "I have been in discussions with a real estate developer," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "They are interested in investing in this community, bringing in new, high-value homes. But they will not proceed unless we take action to clean up our neighborhood. That starts with ensuring that farms, barns, and large livestock are no longer allowed within our HOA." That got the room buzzing. Some people nodded in agreement, but others looked uneasy. They didn't like me, sure, but they also didn't like the idea of their quiet town turning into some overdeveloped nightmare. I stood up. "Well, that was quite a speech, Karen," I said, taking my time walking to the front of the room. "You almost convinced me that I was some kind of outlaw." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, but Karen wasn't amused. I turned to face everyone. "Folks, I've lived here for a while now. I've been nothing but a good neighbor. I've helped fix fences, plowed driveways in the winter, given out free eggs and milk to families who needed them. But this ain't about my farm, is it?" I let that hang in the air for a moment. "This is about power. This is about Karen wanting full control over this place. You think once my farm is gone, she'll stop? No. She'll find something else to ban, someone else to target. First, it's my animals. Next, it'll be your gardens being too tall, your sheds being the wrong color, your cars parked in the wrong direction. That's how it starts." People were shifting in their seats now, glancing at each other. They knew I wasn't wrong. Karen forced a laugh. "Jake, please. Don't be dramatic." "Oh, I'm not," I said, smiling. "You want to talk about drama? Let's talk about that developer you mentioned." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a few papers. I did some digging. Turns out this developer isn't some big company looking to invest in the community. It's Karen's cousin. She's got a deal lined up to sell off land at a premium price. Land that just so happens to be mine if she can get me out of here. That sent a shockwave through the room. Karen's smug expression faltered. That's ridiculous, she said quickly. That's a complete fabrication. Oh, is it? I held up the documents. Because I've got proof. Emails. Transaction records. And a little note from your cousin about how you'd get a cut of the profits. The murmurs turned into full-on conversations. People were glaring at Karen now. A few of the HOA members who had been on her side started distancing themselves, literally leaning away from her. Someone in the back spoke up. Is this true, Karen? She sputtered, looking around for support, but it was crumbling fast. She had spent so much time making me the bad guy that she hadn't realized how much people already disliked her overreach. Then, just to drive the final nail into the coffin, I turned to the HOA president. By the way, you might want to check your rules about livestock. Turns out, there's a grandfather clause that protects farms that existed before the HOA was established. And guess what? My farm has been here since 1965. Karen's face drained of color. She knew she had lost. The HOA president cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough. Let's put it to a vote. It wasn't even close. The majority voted against Karen's proposal, officially shutting down any attempt to remove my farm. The few who had supported her before now sat in awkward silence, avoiding eye contact. Karen stormed out, defeated, humiliated, and with no more tricks left to play. The HOA members quickly turned on her, calling for her resignation as president. Within the week, she stepped down in disgrace. A few days later, I threw a barbecue for the whole neighborhood. Even some of the folks who had been unsure about me before showed up, drawn in by the smell of ribs and smoked brisket. People laughed, drank, and for the first time in a long time, actually enjoyed themselves without worrying about some ridiculous HOA rule hanging over their heads. Karen, of course, wasn't invited. But that didn't stop her from trying to sneak onto my property again, probably hoping to complain about the noise. That's when Meatball spotted her. The last thing I saw before she disappeared down the road was her sprinting for her life, my bull trotting behind her, looking like he was having the time of his life. I leaned back in my chair sipping my drink. Peace at last.